The day I lost everything started like any other court appearance. I'd been through 6 months of brutal divorce proceedings, watched my marriage disintegrate in a series of increasingly hostile lawyer meetings, and prepared myself for the worst. But nothing could have prepared me for just how thoroughly my life was about to be destroyed. My name is Marcus Chen, and this is the story of how I went from having everything to having nothing, and then discovered something that changed everything. The courtroom was cold that November morning. Not just physically cold, though the air conditioning seemed to be set to Arctic levels. Cold in the way that institutional spaces are cold, indifferent to human suffering, designed for efficiency rather than comfort. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting everyone in an unflattering pallor that made even the youngest lawyer look tired and worn. My ex-wife, Victoria, sat across the aisle with her lawyer, a shark in a $1,000 suit named Richard Strauss, who smiled like he'd already won, which, it turned out, he had. Victoria looked radiant, I noticed, with a sick feeling in my stomach. She'd dressed carefully for this final hearing. A tasteful navy dress, pearls, her blonde hair styled perfectly. She looked like the picture of a wronged woman who'd finally found justice, not the calculating strategist who'd been planning my destruction for months. Before we get into it, don't forget to like and subscribe, and hit hype to boost this episode. Drop a comment below with your city or country. I'm always curious where viewers are joining from. I, on the other hand, looked exactly like what I was, a man who'd been through hell. My suit, which had once cost $2,000, hung loose on my frame. I'd lost 20 pounds during the divorce from stress and an inability to eat. My lawyer, Tom Henderson, sat beside me shuffling papers nervously. He'd done his best, but we'd been outmaneuvered at every turn. Victoria's lawyer had resources we couldn't match, investigators we couldn't afford, a strategy we couldn't counter. It had been exactly 8 years, 3 months, and 17 days since Victoria and I had stood in a different courthouse, this same building actually, and gotten married. A small ceremony, just close friends and family, because we were young and in love and didn't need anything fancy. We just needed each other. Or so I'd thought. Victoria and I had been married for 8 years. We'd built what I thought was a good life together. I'd worked from junior analyst to senior vice president at a tech firm, pulling in a comfortable 6-figure salary. We'd bought our dream house, 4 bedrooms, infinity pool, mountain views, worth $4.7 million. We drove matching Mercedes. We had Tyler, who was 6 years old and the light of my life. And then Victoria decided she was done. The marriage fell apart for the usual reasons. We grew apart, wanted different things, stopped communicating. She claimed I worked too much, was never home, prioritized career over family. Some of that was probably true. What I didn't know was that while I was working those long hours, Victoria was building her case, documenting every missed dinner, every soccer game I couldn't attend, every moment I chose work over family. Her lawyer had been preparing for months before she even told me she wanted a divorce. By the time I hired my own attorney, I was already behind. The judge, a stern woman in her 60s, reviewed the final settlement with clinical detachment. I sat there, hands clenched in my lap, as she read through the terms. The house, awarded to Victoria, given that she would have primary custody and Tyler needed stability. The vehicles. Victoria kept her Mercedes. I got nothing. Apparently mine was considered part of the marital assets that needed to be liquidated to pay her legal fees. Retirement accounts. Split, but after legal fees and penalties, my half was basically decimated, and then came the part that really gutted me. Custody of Tyler, primary custody to Victoria, with me getting supervised visitation every other weekend, pending review. Supervised visitation, as if I were some kind of danger to my own son. As if 8 years of being a devoted, loving father counted for nothing, because I'd worked hard to provide for my family. I tried to speak, to object, to make the judge understand that this wasn't fair, that I loved my son more than anything, that I deserved better than 2 supervised weekends a month. My lawyer put a hand on my arm. "Don't," he whispered. "It'll only make it worse." Worse than what? Than losing my home, my car, my savings, and my son? The judge banged her gavel. "This court is adjourned." Victoria stood, smoothing down her designer dress. She'd dressed for victory, expensive, elegant, every inch the wronged woman who'd triumphed over her negligent husband. She picked up her handbag, turned to me, and smiled. It wasn't a kind smile. It was triumphant, cruel, and satisfied. "Enjoy poverty, Marcus," she said, loud enough for our lawyers and several court officials to hear. Then she walked out, her heels clicking on the marble floor, and I sat there in the empty courtroom, completely hollow. That was 6 months ago. 6 months that felt like 6 years. I moved out of her $4.7 million house and into a studio apartment in a neighborhood I would have driven past without a second thought in my old life. 400 square feet, paper-thin walls, water stains on the ceiling, and a persistent smell of cigarette smoke that no amount of air freshener could mask. My old salary had evaporated when my company, citing performance issues related to my personal problems, laid me off. Victoria's lawyers had made sure everyone knew about the divorce, painting me as an absent father and unreliable employee. My reputation was trashed. Nobody in my industry would touch me. The severance was a joke, and after legal fees, I had maybe $20,000 left to my name. In a city where rent alone cost $2,000 a month, that money wouldn't last long. I couldn't afford my old lifestyle. I couldn't afford much of anything. I sold my watches, my designer suits, everything of value. I ate ramen and canned soup. I stopped going out, stopped seeing friends. Not that many of them stuck around after the divorce anyway. But none of that hurt as much as losing Tyler. Every other weekend, I'd show up at a supervised visitation center, a cheerful room with toys and games, and a woman named Susan, who sat in the corner taking notes on our interaction. Tyler would run to me, and for 2 hours, I got to be his dad again. We'd play games, read books, talk about school, and then time would be up, and I'd have to watch him leave, back to the house that used to be mine, back to the life I'd been removed from. Victoria was already dating someone new, Greg, some finance guy with perfect teeth and a beach house. Tyler mentioned him occasionally, carefully, like he knew it would hurt me to hear about the man who was essentially replacing me. At night, alone in my studio apartment, I'd lie awake staring at the water-stained ceiling, wondering how everything had gone so wrong so fast. Depression settled over me like a weighted blanket. Some days I could barely get out of bed. The idea of rebuilding my life felt impossible, overwhelming, pointless. I needed money, desperately. The unemployment benefits were running out, my savings were nearly gone, and nobody would hire me for the kind of work I used to do, so I took the only job I could get, cleaning out foreclosed houses for a property management company. The job was exactly as depressing as it sounds. When people lose their homes to foreclosure, they often leave in a hurry, abandoning belongings they can't take or don't want. Someone has to go in, clean out the debris, dispose of the trash, prepare the property for resale. That someone was now me. The pay was $13 an hour. The work was dirty, physically exhausting, and emotionally draining. I'd show up at houses that still had family photos on the walls, children's toys scattered in bedrooms, half-eaten meals in fridges, the ghosts of lives interrupted, families displaced, dreams foreclosed along with the mortgages. I couldn't help but see myself in those abandoned homes. My life had been foreclosed too. The difference was I was still breathing, still going through the motions, still pretending there was a point to any of it. My crew chief was Ray, late 50s, weathered and cynical. He'd been doing this work for 15 years. "Don't get sentimental," he told me on my first day. "You'll see sad shit. People lose everything. Not your problem. clean it out, and move on. We worked in teams of 2 or 3, moving from property to property, strip out garbage, salvage anything valuable, make the place presentable, 12-hour shifts, 6 days a week. My body ached constantly. My hands developed calluses. But it was work. It was money. It kept me from being evicted and kept my mind occupied enough that I didn't spend every moment thinking about Tyler. Most houses we cleared were sad but straightforward. Trash bags full of clothes and papers, furniture left behind, random belongings. We'd haul it to the dump, scrub surfaces, move on to the next one. But there was one house that was different. It was a cold Tuesday in March, about 4 months into my foreclosure cleanup career. Ray assigned me and Danny to a property on the east side. An old ranch house, foreclosed after the owner died, and the estate couldn't pay back taxes. Should be easy, Ray said. Old guy, no family, probably just junk. Get it done by end of day. The house was a dump. Peeling paint, overgrown yard, windows so filthy you could barely see through them. The lock was already broken, probably vandals or squatters, so we just pushed the door open and went in. The smell hit us immediately. Mold, dust, decay. The house had been sitting empty for at least a year, maybe longer. Wallpaper peeled in strips, floorboards were warped, and water damage stained the ceilings. This place was heading for demolition, not resale. Jesus, Danny muttered, pulling his bandana up over his nose. This is rank. We split up to assess the situation. Danny took the upstairs bedrooms, I took the main floor. Kitchen was full of empty cupboards and a fridge that I refused to open. Living room had a torn couch and a TV from the 1990s. Bathroom was better left undiscussed. Then I found the basement stairs. Basements in these old houses were always the worst. Dark, damp, full of spiders and sometimes worse things. But we had to clear them out too. I flicked the light switch. Nothing, of course. I pulled out my flashlight and descended the creaking wooden stairs, each step protesting under my weight. The basement was exactly what I expected. Concrete floor, exposed beams, water damage everywhere. Boxes of old junk stacked against the walls, some moldy furniture, a workbench covered in dust. And in the corner, partially hidden behind a collapsed cardboard box and covered in years of dust and cobwebs, sat a rusted metal filing cabinet. I almost didn't bother with it. We weren't supposed to spend time going through paperwork, just toss it all in trash bags and haul it to the dumpster. Ray had been clear about that. Time is money. Don't waste hours reading dead people's mail. Trash it and move on. But something made me walk over to that filing cabinet. Maybe curiosity, maybe boredom, maybe something else, fate, destiny, my grandfather's ghost guiding my hand. I don't know. The filing cabinet was old, probably from the 1960s or 70s. Forest green paint peeled away in strips, revealing rust underneath. The metal was cold and rough under my fingers as I pulled at the top drawer. First drawer, locked, or maybe just rusted shut. I yanked harder. It screeched open, the sound echoing in the empty basement. Inside was nothing but dust, a dead spider, and disappointment. Second drawer, stuck solid. I pulled, yanked, braced my foot against the cabinet and heaved. Nothing. It wasn't budging. Third drawer, slid open easily, smooth as butter, like it had been waiting for me. Empty, except for a faded red folder with nothing in it. Fourth drawer, resisted at first, then scraped open with a metallic groan that set my teeth on edge. Inside were file folders, maybe a dozen of them, yellowed with age, some water-damaged at the edges but mostly intact. The smell that wafted up was musty but not unpleasant, old paper, dried ink, the scent of decades past. I pulled them out one by one, barely looking at the labels at first. Old utility bills from an address I didn't recognize. Insurance papers for a car that probably hadn't existed since the Reagan administration. Warranty documents from the 1970s for appliances long since defunct. Tax returns from years when Nixon was president. All of it trash, meaningless detritus from a life long over. I was about to shove it all back in the drawer and call it a day when my flashlight beam caught something on the tab of one folder near the back. A name that made me freeze. Robert Chen. Property records. Chen. My last name. My family name. My heart started beating faster, loud enough that I could hear it in the silence of the basement. It was probably a coincidence, I told myself. Chen is a common name, one of the most common Chinese surnames. There were probably thousands of Robert Chens, tens of thousands. This was just random chance, nothing more. But my hands were shaking as I pulled out the folder. The paper was heavier than the others, higher quality. Legal documents, I realized, the kind that are meant to last. And stapled to the inside of the folder, partially hidden under the first document, was a faded color photograph. I angled my flashlight to get a better look. The photo showed an older Chinese man, maybe in his 60s, standing in front of a hand-painted "Land for Sale" sign. Behind him stretched empty scrubland, dirt, sparse grass, a few scraggly trees, nothing remarkable. The man wore slacks and a short-sleeved button-up shirt, his hand resting on the sign, his face showing just the hint of a smile. The photo was dated on the back in pencil. April 1961, Austin. I knew that face. I'd seen it in my mother's photo albums, in the handful of pictures we had from family gatherings when I was a child. I'd seen it in my dreams after he died, my child's memory preserving the soft smile and weathered hands of the man who used to slip me candy and tell me stories about Taiwan in accented English. It was my grandfather, Robert Chen, my mother's father. My hands weren't just shaking now. They were trembling so badly I nearly dropped the folder. I set it carefully on top of the filing cabinet and pulled out the documents inside, one by one, examining each with the focused intensity of an archaeologist uncovering ancient treasure. Property surveys with my grandfather's signature, title documents bearing his name, letters from lawyers and real estate agents, tax payment receipts spanning decades, and then, clipped to one of the surveys with a rusty paperclip, a handwritten note on lined paper, the ink faded, but still legible. For my grandson, Marcus, may this bring prosperity and security in his life. I am sorry I could not give this to you myself. Your grandfather, Robert Chen, October 1998. My grandson, Marcus. That was me. My name, in my grandfather's handwriting, on a note attached to property documents. I had to sit down. There was an overturned bucket nearby, so I dragged it over and sat, my legs suddenly unable to support me. The flashlight beam wavered as my hands shook. I sat down hard on an overturned bucket, my mind reeling. My grandfather had died when I was 12, over 20 years ago. I remembered him vaguely, a quiet man who'd immigrated from Taiwan in the 1950s, worked as a grocer, never had much money. When he died, there was no estate, no inheritance, just some old photos and a couple pieces of furniture my mother kept. Or so I'd been told. Why were these documents here? In some random foreclosed house? How did they end up in a basement filing cabinet in a property I just happened to be assigned to clean? I dug deeper into the folder, and then I found it. A property deed. Old, official, embossed with a notary seal from 1961. Property deed, 127 acres, Austin, Texas, purchased by Robert Chen, April 1961. Price, $3,200. 127 acres. In Austin, Texas. My grandfather bought land in Austin in 1961. I didn't know anything about real estate, but even I knew that Austin had exploded in the last few decades. Tech companies, population boom, property values skyrocketing. Land that was worthless in 1961 could be worth, I didn't even want to think about how much. But it was probably long gone. Sold off decades ago. Developed by someone else. This deed was just a historical document, a reminder of a long-lost investment. Still, my hands were shaking as I pulled out my phone. The signal in the basement was weak, but I had just enough to open Google Maps. I typed in the address from the deed, my fingers fumbling on the screen. The map loaded slowly. A blue dot appeared, pinpointing the location. I zoomed in, and my heart stopped, because the land wasn't empty. It wasn't undeveloped. It wasn't forgotten. On those 127 acres stood a massive corporate campus, glass buildings, parking structures, manicured lawns, and in the center, a logo I recognized immediately, one of the biggest tech companies in the world, their Austin headquarters, built on what appeared to be my grandfather's land. I stared at my phone, unable to breathe. This couldn't be real. This couldn't be right. But the property lines on the old survey matched up with the satellite view. The location was exact. The acreage was exact. My grandfather had bought 127 acres in Austin in 1961 for $3,200, and now, over 60 years later, one of the world's largest tech companies had built their corporate headquarters on it. I did a quick search on my phone, Austin commercial real estate values. The numbers that came up made me dizzy. Prime commercial land in Austin was going for anywhere from $2 million to $10 million per acre, depending on location and development. If this was indeed a 127 acres in a prime location with a tech campus on it, I did the math in my head. Even at the conservative estimate of $3 million per acre, that was over $380 million. At the high end, over $1 billion. My vision blurred. I had to sit down. I was already sitting. I had to process this, had to think, had to figure out if this was real or if I was losing my mind from stress and depression and too many nights sleeping on a mattress that smelled like previous tenants' failures. "Yo, Marcus," Danny's voice echoed down from upstairs. "You dead down there? We gotta move, man. Ray wants us at the next property in an hour." I carefully, reverently, folded the documents and slid them back into the folder. Then I tucked the entire folder under my jacket. "Coming!" I called back, my voice shaking. I climbed the basement stairs on trembling legs, walked out of that foreclosed house, and got into the company truck with Danny. He was talking about something, his girlfriend maybe, or his plans for the weekend, but I couldn't hear him. Blood was rushing in my ears. I had just stolen from a work site. Technically, everything in that house belonged to the property management company or the bank that foreclosed it. Taking anything was theft. I didn't care. Those documents had my grandfather's name on them. They had my name on them. They were mine by right, even if not by law. That night, back in my depressing studio apartment, I spread the documents out on my tiny kitchen table and went through them one by one under the harsh overhead light. The deed was legitimate, notarized, filed with the county, all the official seals and stamps. My grandfather had purchased 127 acres of land outside Austin, Texas, in April 1961 for $3,200 cash. According to the documents, the land was basically scrubland at the time. Austin was still a sleepy state capital, not the booming tech hub it would become. My grandfather probably bought it as a speculative investment, hoping it would appreciate someday. But then what? Why had nobody in the family known about this? Why was there no record of this property when he died? Why had these documents ended up in a random foreclosed house? I kept digging through the papers, and then I found a letter, handwritten in shaky script, dated just a few weeks before my grandfather's death. To my grandson Marcus, I am old now, and my time is short. There are things I should have told your mother, but I was stubborn and proud, and now it is too late for many conversations. I bought land in Texas long ago. I meant to build something there, to create a legacy for my family. But life took me in other directions, and the land sat empty. I paid the taxes every year, kept the deed safe, but I never did anything with it. Your mother and I had a falling out when she married your father. I was too traditional, too hard on her. We stopped speaking for many years. By the time we reconciled, I was too ashamed to tell her about the land. I thought she would see it as me trying to control her with money, so I kept it secret. And now I am dying, and I realize I have made a terrible mistake. The deed and all documents are stored safely. When the time is right, they will find their way to you. Use this gift wisely. Build something good with it. And forgive an old man his pride. Your grandfather, Robert Chen. I read the letter 3 times, tears blurring my vision. My grandfather had bought land as a legacy. He'd kept it secret because of family drama. And somehow, he'd arranged for these documents to find their way to me. But how? How had they ended up in a foreclosed house I just happened to be assigned to clean? I dug through more papers and found my answer. A name I recognized. Howard Peterson. He'd been my grandfather's lawyer and friend. According to a note paperclip to the deed, Howard had been instructed to hold the documents until they could be transferred to me at the appropriate time. I Googled Howard Peterson. Obituary from 2 years ago. Died at 89, no surviving family. Estate sold off, belongings dispersed. And apparently, a filing cabinet full of his old client documents had ended up in his house, which eventually went into foreclosure when nobody paid the property taxes, which eventually got assigned to a cleanup crew, which eventually led to me pulling it out of a basement. The universe works in strange ways. But none of that mattered right now. What mattered was the deed. What mattered was 127 acres in Austin, Texas. What mattered was finding out if this was real, if it was still legally valid, and if I actually owned land that was currently occupied by a billion-dollar tech company. I spent the next 3 days researching property law, title searches, and adverse possession. I learned more about real estate than I'd ever wanted to know. And the more I learned, the more my hands shook. Because according to everything I could find, if my grandfather's deed was legitimate and properly filed, and if taxes had been paid continuously, then the property still belonged to his estate, which meant it belonged to his heirs, which meant it belonged to my mother, and since she'd passed away 5 years ago, it belonged to me, which meant that tech company had built their entire Austin headquarters on land they didn't own. I needed a lawyer, a good one, but lawyers cost money I didn't have. I sold everything I owned that had any value left. My old laptop, my TV, my furniture. I scraped together $5,000 and started calling real estate attorneys. Most of them laughed me off the phone. A few asked for retainers I couldn't afford. One told me I was wasting my time with obvious forgery and hung up on me. Then I found Patricia Nguyen. Patricia ran a small practice specializing in property disputes and title issues. Her office was above a Vietnamese restaurant, and her rates were reasonable because she was building her practice. When I called, she actually listened. "Send me everything you have," she said. "I'll take a look." I scanned every document, every letter, every scrap of paper from that folder and emailed it to her. Then I waited, pacing my apartment, unable to eat or sleep. She called me 2 days later. "Mr. Chen, we need to meet. In person. Today, if possible." Her voice was strange, tight, excited maybe, or shocked. I took the bus to her office, climbed the narrow stairs that smelled like pho and lemongrass, and knocked on her door. Patricia was younger than I'd expected, maybe mid-30s, with sharp eyes and an intense focus that made me feel like I was under a microscope. "Sit," she said, gesturing to a chair across from her cluttered desk. I sat. She pulled out the documents. She'd printed everything I'd sent and spread them across her desk. "I had a title company run a search," she said. "I wanted to verify the deed before we went any further. Mr. Chen, this is legitimate. Your grandfather purchased 127 acres in Austin in 1961, filed the deed properly with the county, and according to tax records, someone, probably his lawyer, this Howard Peterson, continued paying property taxes on the land all the way until last year." My mouth went dry. Last year? The payments stopped when Peterson died. But here's the thing about property ownership in Texas. If you have a valid deed and you've been paying taxes, you own the land, period, even if someone else builds on it. But the tech company built their headquarters on land they don't own, Patricia finished. They likely did a title search, but something went wrong. Maybe Peterson's name was on the tax records instead of your grandfather's, and they missed the connection. Maybe they assumed the property was in the public domain. Maybe someone at the city level screwed up when issuing building permits. I don't know yet. But Mr. Chen, if everything checks out, and I believe it will, you are the legal owner of 127 acres of prime Austin real estate, currently occupied by a major tech company. I couldn't speak, couldn't breathe. Do you understand what this means? Patricia asked gently. This isn't just valuable land. This is a catastrophic title defect for one of the biggest companies in the world. They built a multi-billion-dollar campus on land they don't own, and you can prove you do own it. What happens now? Patricia leaned back in her chair. Now, we file a quiet title action to establish your ownership officially. We notify the tech company, and then we negotiate. Negotiate? They can't just ignore this. If you own the land and can prove it, which you can, they have 3 options. Buy the land from you at current market value, lease the land from you at terms you set, or tear down their entire campus and relocate. Which option do you think they'll choose? I did the math in my head again. 127 acres at current Austin commercial rates. Even at the conservative estimate. Hundreds of millions, I whispered. Patricia smiled. At minimum, possibly more. This is the kind of case that makes careers, Mr. Chen, and I'd very much like to represent you. I can't afford you. I'll work on contingency. We win. I take a percentage of the settlement. We lose. You owe me nothing. But Mr. Chen, we're not going to lose. This is the most airtight property claim I've ever seen. I should have been elated. This was the answer to everything. My money problems, my housing problems, my ability to fight Victoria for real custody of Tyler. This was divine intervention, cosmic justice, the universe finally throwing me a bone after beating me senseless for a year. But all I felt was numb. Why? I asked. Why did this happen? Why did those documents end up in a house I was cleaning? Why did my grandfather's lawyer's estate end up in foreclosure? Why did everything line up perfectly for me to find this? Patricia shrugged. Luck, fate, karma. Does it matter? What matters is you found it, and now we make sure you keep it. Over the next 2 months, Patricia worked her magic. She filed the quiet title action, established the chain of ownership from my grandfather to me, verified the deed's authenticity with multiple experts, and compiled a case that was, as she'd promised, airtight. Then she sent a letter to the tech company's legal department. The response was immediate and explosive. Within 24 hours, 3 lawyers from their corporate team were on a plane to meet with us. Within 48 hours, the story leaked to the press, some paralegal who couldn't keep their mouth shut. Within 72 hours, my life was chaos. News crews camped outside my apartment building. Reporters called my phone constantly. Social media exploded with the story. Tech giant built campus on land they don't own. Cleaner strikes it rich. The tech company's lawyers tried everything. They claimed the deed was forged, until 3 independent experts verified it was genuine. They claimed adverse possession, but Patricia proved continuous tax payments meant the clock never started. They claimed my grandfather had sold the land years ago, but couldn't produce any sale documents. Finally, they offered to negotiate. The first offer was insulting, $10 million for full property rights. Patricia laughed them out of her office. The second offer, $50 million. Patricia told them to get serious. The third offer, $150 million plus attorney fees. Patricia looked at me. We can push for more. This land is worth at least $300 million by conservative estimates. But I was tired. I was so tired. And $150 million was more money than I could comprehend. More than enough to rebuild my life, fight for custody of Tyler, never work another day if I didn't want to. Take it, I said. The settlement took another month to finalize. Lawyers, negotiations, paperwork, more paperwork, endless signatures. But those weeks were among the most intense of my entire life. A pressure cooker of legal maneuvering and high-stakes poker, where every move could mean millions of dollars. The tech company threw everything at us. Their legal team, and we're talking about some of the most expensive lawyers in the country, tried every angle imaginable. They commissioned their own historical survey of the property, trying to find any gap in the chain of ownership. Their researchers combed through decades of county records, looking for a single missed tax payment, a single filing error, anything that would invalidate the deed. They found nothing. Howard Peterson, my grandfather's lawyer, had been meticulous. Every year, like clockwork, the property taxes had been paid. Every document had been filed properly. The chain was unbroken. They brought in forensic document experts to examine the deed itself, hoping to prove it was a forgery. 3 separate experts, all of them with impressive credentials, all of them charging obscene hourly rates. Each one confirmed the same thing. The deed was genuine, the paper was period appropriate, the ink was consistent with 1961, the notary seal was authentic. They even tracked down descendants of the notary who'd signed it, verifying his signature style. Dead end. They tried to argue abandonment, that by not developing the land for 60 years, my grandfather had effectively abandoned any claim to it. Patricia demolished that argument in about 15 minutes, citing case law that made it clear that paying taxes and maintaining title meant the property was never abandoned, regardless of whether it was developed. They floated a theory about eminent domain, suggesting the city might have seized the property at some point for public use. But there was no record of any such seizure, no paperwork, no compensation paid. Another dead end. They even tried to intimidate us. Not directly, they were too smart for that. But suddenly I started getting calls from other lawyers, people I'd never heard of, offering to buy out my claim for quick cash settlements. 10 million, 20 million, 30 million. All of them emphasizing how expensive and risky it would be to fight this in court. How I might lose everything. How I should take the sure thing now. Patricia warned me this would happen. "They're trying to spook you," she said. "They want you to think your case isn't as strong as it is. Don't take any meetings without me present. Don't sign anything. And for God's sake, don't let them see you sweat." I didn't sweat. Not outwardly, anyway. Inside, I was terrified. What if they found something? What if some technicality I didn't understand would unravel everything? What if I'd gotten my hopes up, only to have them crushed again? But Patricia remained confident. "Marcus, I've been doing this for 10 years. I've seen strong cases and weak cases. This isn't just strong. This is titanium. They know it. We know it. Now it's just about how much they're willing to pay to make this go away quietly." The media attention didn't help the tech company's position. The story had leaked. Someone in the county recorder's office, we later learned, had seen our quiet title filing and tipped off a reporter friend. Within days, it was everywhere. Tech giant's $3 billion campus built on stolen land. David versus Goliath. Homeless cleaner takes on Silicon Valley. How did a Fortune 500 company miss this title defect? The headlines were sensational, but they weren't exactly wrong. The optics were terrible for the company. Here was a massive corporation that had somehow built an entire headquarters campus without properly verifying they owned the land. And now a regular guy who'd lost everything, the media loved that angle, was holding the deed that proved they'd screwed up. Their stock took a hit. Not a huge one, but enough to make their board nervous. Shareholders started asking uncomfortable questions. Competitors made snide comments. The whole thing was becoming a public relations nightmare. That's when the settlement offers started getting serious. The first serious offer came 3 weeks into the battle. $75 million, take it or leave it. Patricia and I discussed it. That's life-changing money. she said. But this land is worth $300 million conservatively. We have leverage. We can push for more. What if they walk away? They won't. Fighting would cost tens of millions in legal fees, plus negative publicity, plus the risk of losing and paying even more. They want this settled. We rejected $75 million next offer, $100 million. We countered at $200 million. They came back at $125 million. We countered at $180 million. They came back at $150 million. Final offer, take it or go to trial. Patricia laid out the scenarios. Trial means another year or two, appeals, uncertainty. Or take $150 million now, walk away with roughly $90 million after fees and taxes, and move on with your life. I thought about Tyler, about the custody hearing coming up, about being done with all this. Take it, I said. Patricia nodded. I think that's wise. Let me draft an acceptance. The final settlement agreement was 40 pages long, filled with legal language that Patricia had to translate for me. The key points were simple enough. I would transfer all rights to the property to the tech company. They would pay me $150 million in a lump sum, wire transferred to an escrow account. I would sign a comprehensive NDA covering the terms of the settlement and agreeing not to disparage the company publicly. The whole thing would be kept confidential, with only minimal public disclosure required by law. The tech company insisted on several additional clauses. I couldn't write a book about this. I couldn't sell movie rights. I couldn't do interviews specifically about the settlement. I could acknowledge that we'd reached a settlement, but I couldn't discuss numbers or specific terms. Fine. I didn't care about telling the story. I cared about the money and what it could do for my life. The signing took place in a conference room at a neutral law office in downtown Austin. The tech company's legal team was there, 5 lawyers, all looking like they'd rather be anywhere else. Patricia sat beside me. A notary was present to witness signatures. We went through the documents page by page. I initialed here, signed there, dated this, witnessed that. My hand cramped from signing my name so many times. The tech company's chief counsel, a severe woman in her 50s, signed her sections with practiced efficiency. And then it was done. 40 pages of signatures later, I owned nothing, and they owned everything, and I was $150 million richer. The wire transfer hit my account on a Friday afternoon, $150,000. I was sitting in Patricia's office when she got the confirmation email. She looked up at me, and for the first time since I'd met her, she smiled broadly. Congratulations, Mr. Chen. You're officially very wealthy. I stared at her computer screen, at the confirmation number, at the amount. $150 million. My grandfather's $3,200 investment in 1961 had just paid out a 46,875x return over 62 years. Thank you, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. For everything. For believing me. For fighting for me. Thank you for trusting me, Patricia said. This is the biggest case I've ever handled. Probably the biggest I'll ever handle. You've changed my career, Marcus. I'm grateful. I paid her the agreed contingency fee, 20% of the settlement, which came to $30 million. She'd earned every penny and then some. After her fee, after taxes that ate up roughly another $30 million, after various legal expenses and other costs, I was left with approximately $87 million. $87 million. More money than I could spend in 10 lifetimes. More money than my grandfather could have imagined when he bought that scrubland in Texas. More money than Victoria had taken from me in the divorce, by a factor of about 20. The universe had a strange sense of justice. I paid off every debt. I bought a house, comfortable, with a yard for Tyler in a good school district. I bought a reliable car. I put money in trust for Tyler's future. I donated to causes that mattered. I set myself up with financial advisors, and then I hired the best family lawyer in the state and filed for custody modification. Victoria's lawyer tried to argue that my newfound wealth didn't change the custody arrangement, but my new lawyer, who cost more per hour than I used to make in a week, buried them in paperwork, expert witnesses, and psychological evaluations. The supervised visitation restriction was lifted immediately. My wealth proved I could provide a stable home. My regular attendance at therapy showed I was addressing my mental health. Character witnesses testified I'd been a devoted father who'd fallen on hard times but never stopped fighting for my son. 6 months after the settlement, I was awarded joint custody, 50-50 split. Tyler would spend half his time with me, half with Victoria. The look on Victoria's face when the judge announced the decision was something I'll treasure forever. After the hearing, in the courthouse parking lot, Victoria approached me. She'd lost weight, looked tired, less polished than before. The new boyfriend, Greg, had apparently decided she wasn't worth the drama and had moved on. "Marcus," she said, her voice careful, "I've been thinking, maybe we were too hasty with the divorce. Maybe we could try again. For Tyler's sake." I looked at her, this woman who'd laughed at me, who'd told me to enjoy poverty, who'd taken everything and smiled while doing it. "No," I said simply, "but we're good together. We have history, and Tyler needs both his parents." "Tyler has both his parents," I interrupted. "We're just not married anymore, and we're not getting back together. Ever. But the money has nothing to do with you," I finished. "You made your choice, Victoria. You wanted everything in the divorce and you got it. What happened after that is none of your business." Her expression shifted from pleading to calculating. "I could file for increased child support. You have means now. And you have a very expensive lawyer on retainer who will explain to you exactly why that won't work. The divorce is final. The settlement is done. Move on." I walked away, got in my car, and drove to pick up Tyler from school. We were going to get ice cream, and then I was going to take him to see our new house for the first time. That was 6 months ago. Life has settled into something resembling normal, though it's a very different normal than I'd imagined a year ago. I don't clean foreclosed houses anymore. I don't work at all, actually, though I'm considering investing in some businesses and maybe doing some philanthropic work. I spend my time with Tyler, go to therapy regularly, and try to build a life that has meaning beyond just money. The tech company's headquarters still stands on what used to be my grandfather's land, now their land, fair and square. Every time I see a news story about them, I smile a little. They'll never admit publicly what happened, but they know, and I know. My grandfather's letter sits framed on my desk. "Use this gift wisely, build something good with it." I'm trying, Grandpa, I'm trying. People ask me all the time, do I regret the divorce? Do I regret losing everything? And here's the strange truth. No. Not really. If Victoria hadn't taken everything, I wouldn't have been desperate enough to take that cleaning job. If I hadn't taken that cleaning job, I would never have been in that basement. If I hadn't been in that basement, I never would have found those documents. Sometimes you have to lose everything to find what was hidden all along. Victoria's parting shot, "Enjoy poverty," turned out to be the greatest gift she ever gave me, because in my poverty, I found my grandfather's legacy. In my desperation, I discovered my fortune. In my lowest moment, I found the path to my comeback. I'm not saying money solves everything. It doesn't. I still miss the years of marriage that were good. I still regret not being there enough for Tyler when he was younger. I still carry scars from the divorce and the depression that followed. But money sure as hell doesn't hurt. These days, when I tuck Tyler into bed in our new house, his house, really, the one he'll grow up in and remember, I think about my grandfather. An immigrant grocer who bought scrubland in Texas for $3,200, hoping it might be worth something someday. He couldn't have imagined it would be worth $150 million. He couldn't have known his investment would save his grandson's life 60 years later. But he hoped. He planned. He left a legacy. And in the end, that's what matters. Not the money itself, but what it represents. Someone thinking about the future. Someone caring about family. Someone leaving something behind. My grandfather's gift didn't just give me financial security. It gave me back my dignity, my ability to fight for my son, my future. It gave me back my life. So to anyone out there who's going through a divorce, who's lost everything, who's cleaning toilets in foreclosed houses and wondering if it's worth going on, keep going. You never know what you'll find in the basement. Before you go, remember to like and subscribe if you enjoyed this story. Drop a comment with where you're watching from. I love hearing from people all over the world who've been through similar situations or found their own unexpected windfalls. And remember, sometimes the universe takes everything from you just to make room for something better. Stay strong out there. This is Chen, signing off.